Okay. WMDs. WMD talk. The old WMD chestnut just keeps coming up where I just thought I'd do a video on this because it's however often, almost non-stop even since, where people will bring up, they lied about WMDs. Like what else do you think they're lying about? They lied about WMDs, or they, whatever. And they always, Bush lied, people did. Or they'll say 5 million Iraqis died because of a lie about WMDs or something absurd. And here's the thing: why would George Bush even lie about that? like he couldn't have made up a different reason. And like, you're not lying if you're stupid or ignorant or lacking understanding, and if you wouldn't say make up a WMD hoax and then invade a country, and then because it'll be discovered. And our country isn't like Russia where we don't care. Like with Russia, they'll make up a lie where even once the sun rises, you find out they're just lying, and but those aren't people who care about credibility in the same way that Americans or Europeans do, or even other countries who aren't, who don't have that kind of mentality. The global South kind of thing. And not even to say that some countries are particular for being huge liars. And actually, in some ways, it makes the U.S., like, it makes us, because we're more naive, it's harder for us to understand certain people who are just constantly gaslighting you and lying. Most of the time, Americans aren't comfortable with that kind of, with telling lies like that. So this would be a really absurd thing to lie about. And I remember when the invasion kicked off of Iraq, I was still in high school. So I didn't make it for the OIF 1. I was still in high school. But I volunteered immediately after I graduated. But I remember a teacher, he said, "Oh, I get the feeling that even if like before, like when we were first invading," he said, "I get the feeling that even if even if the WMDs aren't there, we'll find them. We'll find, they would materialize because we would just plant them and say, because we'd put so much on the line with, that was their claim, the WMDs. And so we'll find them. Of course, we didn't. And here's the thing, like when that teacher said that, at first I was thinking like, oh yeah, because you're at the time I had a more cynical attitude. I thought that's probably correct, of course, but it's stupid. And then when we didn't find them, and they're like, yeah, sure enough, it doesn't look like they're here like we thought. I was kind of impressed in a way by the honesty of it, by the fact that we didn't find any, but here's the thing. It was going into the country, we didn't know, and a lot of people didn't necessarily know that. And it was really up for debate And some people might have thought that there were, plenty of people probably thought that there were the WMD because they'd been used before by Saddam Hussein. And here's the thing. This, I think, is getting more clear in hindsight as time goes on, where you could see how with 9/11, with the war on terror, where I think the overall response was correct in certain ways, like that. I mean, I would say the Iraq War is a direct result of 9/11, and if you really argue with that, I think you're kind of dumb. If you're really gonna argue with it, I mean, how can you not see how you have 9/11 and then you have a war on terror, okay, and now you get people who act like we should have done some police work, like we should have sent a detective to arrest bin Laden or something, to indict him on charges, and this should have been settled once the guilty party was established. But I mean, if you had, it's the thing, you're not going to just call it good if one person murders a few thousand, and then you catch the killer, and then you deliver justice. Obviously, you might be thinking about at that point there's a bigger issue and a bigger threat, that somebody could pull this off. So I think when they looked at it as in terms of the context, and when they chose just terrorism in general, which at the time seemed absurd, but as foolish as some of it was, first off, understand that the U.S. has always been kind of foolhardy, and America's what we're good at and our greatness has never been based on like having the correct ideology or something, like, because we never at one point did. I mean, maybe you could say there are parts where we've done really well, but this is a country that's trying to figure itself out, and certainly it changes, and we make good decisions and bad and things. But so we never get things quite right. But in this case, I think we got it right enough, or the impulse was correct enough, that there had to be a general response to terrorists in general, in particular to the kind of bin Laden brand, which is a particular issue because we have however many ties to the Sunni Muslim world. So we're dealing with, in a way, radicals of friendly countries, more or less, people who we do business with, and we're dealing with that certain kind of element. So it creates a scenario where someone like Saddam Hussein, where, like, I'm not going to argue Saddam Hussein was like a bad guy or like Hitler or something, but at the time, you wouldn't say he was a friend of the United States or someone who we could trust, or and I think you could say that in the world that we were shaping post 9/11, he just didn't fit in, and the idea that this guy could possibly have these kind of weapons of mass destruction was unacceptable. And even the not knowing, because here's the thing, they never really figured it out, but you didn't have the inspectors going in. So do you really want like all these like third world countries who hate us to have like whatever kind of like stockpiles of like nuclear, biological, chemical weapons, whatever they may be? And this is a regime that had in the past gone for all of these and extensively used chemical weapons. So it's hard to say there was never any threat there. There's never, This is a guy who would go kind of like he would do kind of crazy stuff. And for a while, he was kind of our guy against Iran, but he didn't really stay on the team. You know, whether or not you want to argue that you think he's cool or he should have or he didn't, you know, or he's a guy who, you know, you got to a point. I mean, he was no friend of us at this time. And the thing is, this came out in his trial that, you know, why weren't you more open that you didn't have all these weapons? And he, you know, he said his explanation was that he was more afraid of Iran. So he needed Iran to think that he really had all this stuff. So in a way, this is kind of a tragic picture begins to emerge with these facts. So he's trying to make it look like he has weapons that he doesn't have all the WMDs that we think. He doesn't have all these stockpiles still. But he has an enemy, a serious enemy who he's gone to war with for a long time. And they're still there. And he feels he needs these weapons. And he was more afraid of them than America, because he didn't think that we were, you know, he figured Iran could do something crazy, but he didn't think America was going to do something that crazy. That he was completely wrong. George W. Bush absolutely proved to be the crazy one. But in a way, it wasn't. I mean, I'm not saying it's crazy. I'm saying it's basic. It's what George W. Bush came up with. I think is entirely justifiable. Even if you want to say not correct or something, you know, but you weren't really the president at the time. You know, you didn't get into office, you know, for whatever reason. You know, and that's how it goes. Someone was making these calls, and really, if you look at, you could say, well, people fabricated intelligence and they didn't figure it out. Okay, but you know, bad on them. That's a different story though than just completely lying about all the stuff. Because otherwise, you could have just made up a different reason why you figured you'd go in. But it really made sense. And actually, what they say that after 9/11, you really can't trust any kind of like renegade third world like country that hates America, is a confirmed American enemy, to have all these kind of weapons. So you just take the regime out, just take them out. You know, I think that's totally justifiable. And going into the future, I think it'd be irresponsible. Like, and I think it has been irresponsible to let different states acquire all these weapons. And I mean, already, like, the idea that India and Pakistan have nukes is like the most absurd thing. I mean, that's not good. The fact that was allowed to happen is a huge problem, and it shows real failings on America's part that we would just allow these things to go on. But I'd say good for George W. Bush for, you know, not say even it, like, don't get me wrong, there's a lot that went wrong with Iraq, and there were huge problems, and there were major misunderstandings and major mistakes, and there were times where we completely didn't know what we were doing, and there were lies that were told, and there's every other thing. But if you all you have to say is the stupid WMDs, it was all about that. It wasn't really about WMDs, and there was other aspects to it. I think the war was it completely worked out. You know, even just installing a democracy in Iraq, which I don't necessarily think we had any business in going that far with. Some of the situation with de-Baathification and getting rid of the army and making this whole thing. I think some of this was completely bonkers, but it did work out in the end. Say what you will. The U.S. installed all the people, built the whole army, built the whole state, wrote the Constitution, and it all still works, and we're still there. They still host our troops, and we provide air support for them, and so on and so forth. And it's in every way. The U.S. still controls Iraq much more than Iran does. Even if you want to, they have the religious ties or whatever. They have, the U.S. still is more influential over Iraq than Iran. And there are huge failings in putting the democracy in place in Iraq for that reason. Which should have been obvious, but like I say, we don't know what we're doing. But just if you stick to the WMD issue, why we went in, and we could have came up with other reasons, but actually this reason is I think good enough. And part of why this is I think this is relevant is I think we will get to a point, especially with where the U.S. has effectively betrayed Ukraine already, by not getting these, by really not backing them to the point where they can win, and withholding a lot of really crucial things, basically on purpose for totally bogus reasons. After we've given security guarantees, after they gave up their nuclear weapons. So this is a state that's given up nukes, and then Russia invades, and Russia you can't do anything to because they have nukes. So in the future, going forward, you have to figure you either have nukes or you don't. And if you don't, you're open to be invaded, and there's no one to really guarantee your safety. Apparently. So you'd figure any third world country with any sense who can put these bombs together, who can get the materials and assemble the stuff. Yeah, they're going to do it because there's no other guarantee for the stuff. And so the more things become decentralized, the more possible that will be. And it's already a part of like the Justin Hinkle vision, the Putin whatever third world global south vision for the world, where all of Africa and Latin America, these countries are like armed with nuclear weapons. That's going to be really great. That'll be great for the future. Or we can have a more aggressive posture and actually maybe limit some of these countries. If you're not sure what's going on, and okay, that in Saddam's case, okay, that there are reasons why we weren't sure, but he just created a situation where it was unacceptable, and the mystery of it was unacceptable for the security of the U.S. I think that's basically fair to say. I think you could have made other cases in terms of Iraq being a state sponsor of terror or something. Some of the stuff was brought up, but obviously the main thing people cry about is the WMD thing. But as far as I'm concerned, even though there were no WMDs, the fact that there could have been WMDs and that we weren't clear on it, and this is not a friendly nation. Not to say you say, oh well, he's more hostile to Israel, or he's more hostile, or he's not a real threat to America, or whatever. It looked like it was bad for America. It seemed like a pretty reasonable place to be drawing lines. And if George W. Bush is saying, no, we're not going to allow like all these goofy countries to just start acquiring all these stockpiles of weapons while we have like people blowing up World Trade Center. That could be a huge problem. In the end, I think the most effective part of Iraq was that it gutted the international Salafi jihadist movement, where these people could come to Iraq and be killed. And so it creates an inferno for them. And then you didn't have so much, they didn't have to go, blow up Europe. They could come to Iraq and get killed. That's what really worked out. As for the WMDs, yeah, you can't, I think it's just totally just, however much people cry about this stuff. And that, oh, well, if, people will only bring up the most emotional arguments about it. Like, oh, well, there's veterans who are homeless or something. Or, there's all these guys with PTSD and however many veterans, are committing whoop-de-woo every month or every day. Or that doesn't mean that doesn't change some of these facts. These emotional arguments about Iraq are... they get more, it gets more and more of the same. It seems like they get more distilled into stupidity as time goes on, where now the main thing is like George W. Bush lied about WMDs, so we killed 5 million Iraqis, on accident or something. That is the dumbest thing. The real reasons to criticize the war on terror were all the more liberal aspects to the war, that there should be like humanitarian aspects and all this different kind of rebuilding and the different when you launch these interventions because someone's like a dictator or something, or someone's bad or something, but that's the kind of bad neocon stuff. That's what kind of most people would criticize neocons at the time, not just as being aggressive, but basically justifying their aggression and as against human rights violators. And so, but we didn't necessarily go to war with Iraq for human rights violations because Saddam's killing his own people, because we could have done that before. After the Gulf War, Saddam was really killing his own people. And that's when the first George Bush is, no, we're not doing anything about it. Because after that, all the Shiites were rising up, Kurds were acting up, and we were even letting them fly their helicopters around and just trounce their own people. We just let them at it. So it wasn't necessarily about human rights violations. It wasn't necessarily about bringing democracy. This is something that came after. A lot of these were mistaken, because what Iraqis, in my experience, what they wanted was like a strong man. Because Iraqis will vote for the Marine colonel to be mayor of their town. In my experience. Because they were asking for like statues of George Bush and things, and when I was there, I mean, they would just come up to you all the time and just be like, George Bush, Zin, like we didn't really like at the time. I did, I could care less. Like I wasn't ideologically motivated so much. I didn't care that much about the president or I was very cynical. As a teenager, and I, going forward, and I didn't care if someone wanted to kiss George Bush's ass, like they thought that the Marines wanted to see that, so they would be all about it, but we couldn't really care less. But that's what they want. That's why, quickly in Iraq we learned. Like, oh, this is why Saddam was killing his own people. You know, like, oh, this is why, you know, because you'd hear for however long, Saddam's killing his own people. And then you get to Iraq. Oh, okay. Oh, okay. You know, but not necessarily that he was justified in all his doings or something. But that's what is needed. I mean, if the U.S. destabilizes places, you could say maybe that's because they need these they need a heavy hand, and so by being kind or by being human, I should say this is a real kindness because it is not kind, but by being, you know, like having this flabby kind of fake humanitarian stuff, the stuff that appeals to that kind of person in the West, the kind of bleeding heart person, and that kind of person should just be ignored. And who cares if they're going to disapprove of the war or whatever. This is the kind of stuff that was throwing wrenches in the gears of the war effort, where it turned into some of that stuff, like a civil affairs project with all the rebuilding and stuff. And this is even when the Iraqi army was just running death squads and things, like sectarian death squads against, you know, they're Shiite, they're all Shiites, and so they're killing the Sunnis. And this is under the guise of like all these stupid ideals or something. There were huge problems, and I think there are big mistakes made with some of that. But that's not the criticisms that people ever really make. You know, some of it they'll get into the profiteering that went on, whether, you know, and certainly I think some of the stuff, you know, is a huge scandal, like 100%. Like there were total scumbags who did have their fingers in the whole project. Like there's tons of criticisms we made, but in the end, after 9/11, a more aggressive posture was justified. We might have just simply taken down the wrong country, and we probably should have went to Iran, who actually was doing more to back Al Qaeda than and even in Iraq, you know, Al Qaeda was considered like Iranian in a way, like even like amongst Sunnis, like they don't really like, you know, they would make these kind of connections that even though Al Qaeda is Sunni, Iran is Shiite, there was a connection there. They knew they were kind of being played. That because there were insurgents who weren't so much a part of that, who would look at their criticism, some of their criticism, say some of the insurgents who work with us or some of the locals, when they would talk about Al Qaeda, Islamic State of Iraq, they say you know, these guys are backed by Iran, really. You know, some of that stuff can be. People in these regions are always going to say that if there's ever some kind of local enemy, they're going to pin it to like an ideological enemy, like they'll pin it to a bigger ideological enemy that's convenient for them. So you could toss that out, but there was some. Iran did back Al Qaeda in different ways. That maybe should have been the better country for a liberation war, where there's however many people who are, you know, Operation Iranian Freedom would have made more sense than Operation Iraqi Freedom, because Operation Iranian Freedom, you'd have people who are like, they're not Arab, and they're more. They're being oppressed by a more religious Shiite system, because they have all these mullahs, and they have an Ayatollah, and they have, like, it's a theocratic state, and so there's how many people who are just, you can imagine, who bristle underneath, and you see some of that, because probably most Iranians don't give that much of a rip about all this like Shiite Islam is pretty wild stuff. It's not like Shintoism or something. It's not like just some simple thing you can kind of put on the back burner. You've got to be pretty into it to the point like you're like cutting your head open. Like, you're either really into it, or you're probably kind of sick of it. And I think Operation Iranian Freedom maybe would have been, but like I'm not. I wasn't the president at the time, but there's mistakes that were made. But if your big criticism is about the WMD, I don't think that's a very good criticism, because I don't think that all these like rogue countries should have WMDs. I think that's good to not let countries have them. Even doing so could really send a message to other countries. Because there were however many other countries who saw that and were like, oh, yeah, okay. The war on terror did reduce terrorism. It actually worked. It actually did. You could say the overall expenditure made it so, like, we only lose however much to terrorism at the time. But you can't just tolerate getting punched in the nose like this. You don't. And then, like, you get punched in the nose, you don't just say, well, I could fight back and I'd probably win, but then I would be more than punched in the nose. I'd also maybe have maybe a cut on my lip or something. That's come on. You get people who act like this. And what could even be said? But the WMD thing, I just thought I'd say a few words on it, because you hear this so much, and that's about my feelings on it. And I haven't always thought this way. Like, you're like, you're brainwashed by George Bush or something. But I haven't actually always thought this way. But more and more, I can look back, as much as George W. Bush said that history would vindicate him, I'm like, oh yeah, it kind of is, isn't it? Because in a way, I was sad that I didn't have really strong feelings. Like I didn't like hate Saddam or think he was whatever. I mean, I think he probably was an evil guy, I guess. But it wasn't like, I had like some burning hatred for him. Like he also seemed likable. At the time, I always thought, like, he had a big smile. He had, big mustache, and he'd always I don't know. He didn't seem like that bad of a guy. Or at least not anybody who you're like, man, I hate that guy. But you think a little more maturely. Just because someone's not maybe, just because someone's cool doesn't mean that, just because someone's based doesn't mean that they're not your enemy or the enemy of your nation. And all these countries now think it's funny to hate America. And at some point, I think we should wipe the smiles off their face. They all thought 9/11 was funny. To them it was like the funniest thing in the world. Like, it's all these New Yorkers are killed, and so, I mean, I wasn't like motivated necessarily for revenge for 9/11 myself. I wasn't like, I'm going to get justice for 9/11 or something, because I'd never even been to New York at the time. I didn't really, like, it didn't seem to hit me. I mean, it seemed crazy, but it didn't like affect me that personally, you know. But on a national level, you can't allow that to go. Like I knew this much. You can't. Obviously, we were gonna fight back. Like Osama bin Laden was obviously our enemy. He had admirable qualities, but he was our enemy. So the war was actually done pretty well. I think Obama, everything that he did screwed it all up. And Obama, the basis of his presidency was like this kind of lame criticism of George W. Bush. We kind of did the opposite of things. And even Obama's wars kind of reflect that, where Gaddafi was somebody who after 9/11 and the climate that was created after 9/11 was panicked. And because before that, even under Reagan, Gaddafi thought it was funny to claim credit for every terrorist attack in the world. That he thought that was all fun and games for a while. And then after 9/11, he had, he's like, oh, he had to renounce, and he tried to play ball in a way, So apparently I don't know. Like, I'm not trying to say he's a good guy. I don't care. Like, this dude is a lunatic, but there was a reversal where this guy is someone who Obama was willing to take out. And then somebody like Assad, who has all these WMDs and is like gassing all these people, Obama will do nothing, or whatever. Where he kind of sets a precedent, to, I mean, I guess that would have been kind of a thing, but like this guy just has all this like sarin gas and all that. Like that's not that great. Like, I mean, there should be, I mean, I think there should be some convention against these kind of weapons. And there is, but you need to enforce. So if you just get away with it, it sets kind of a precedent. Like, this is all cool to do, because we can do things to say that that's not really how we want the world to be run. I personally think that wars should be conducted. There's good reason to not be using this stuff, and if you don't have a cause where you can do it without like using gas or biological weapons or nukes or something. People seem like really comfortable, like almost strangely comfortable with the idea of like this or that would cause nukes or something. I mean, the only real reason to really use nukes would just be if we're approaching like a mad kind of situation, like somebody else has nukes and they're gonna nuke us first. Because otherwise, I mean, if that's the case, yeah, and then that's the big risk. But it seems like people just think that like it's totally on the table to use nukes and all these other like smaller conflicts and things, but it absolutely shouldn't be. Like, I think maybe for General MacArthur or something, like, okay, that was reasonable to have on the table at the time, but by this point, I think everything should be able to be done conventionally. And conventional weapons now, especially with all the precision and everything, are very powerful. So you could do a lot. Like you could wipe out entire cities with conventional, non-nuclear weapons very easily. If you can't do it like that, then you have no business waging war. It's I don't know. It's something that we don't want, because I don't know, if you need to like take out an entire city or something, but in general, that's just not good, because I don't know. Let's say you want to take over a country yourself or something, or I mean the landscape after this or that. It just seems reasonable to just try to avoid that as much as possible. Now more people act like everything's World War III. Like if Iran gets involved, it's World War III. That's not World War III. That'd be called the American-Iran War. Or that would be, we would call that like the Iranian War or something, not World War III. And it was the same thing with like when North Korea was a big thing with Trump and all that. Oh, it looks like we could head to World War III, or Trump's at World War. That would have been called Korean War II, not World War III. World War III implies, at this point, it implies, because in a way, the global war on terror was a world war, and there have been other world wars, like the 7 Years' War was a world war, the 30 Years' War was a world war. But we're talking about, I mean, in the context of things with World War III, we're really talking about a war with Russia that goes nuclear. That would be like a World War III, would it not? Like anything short of that just doesn't seem like, it's not what we're talking about with World War III. But people, it seems like the conversation is everything is World War III now. Anyhow, I think I digress. But we could be approaching a different, I mean, there could be, maybe that will never happen, I guess is the thing. It could be more like, what was the Metal Gear? It was like MGS4 or something. Oh yeah. Where it was like, that was like, I think, Kojima, his idea of like a World War III as being more not, it's like coming up with a different conceptualization of it, where it's more like terrorists, like global terrorists versus like global mercenaries, like global private military companies and things, or like like private armies, versus terrorists could be like across the world. This could be a kind of World War III. That could be a lot closer to what we end up with at some point, or some kind of mix of that. It could be that kind of thing happens, but this is different than the kind of apocalyptic scenario that people lose their heads over. That when people are really flipping out about World War III, they're imagining the Armageddon, nuclear Armageddon. They're talking about the end of the world is what they're thinking in their head. Because they believe in things like nuclear winter, or they might even not know about that, but they think that nukes will just explode the whole planet Earth or something. But we don't really want nukes to go off at all. I mean, I think our prospects of nuclear war are not even that bad. I'm probably on the way overconfident side in how I think we would do in a nuclear war, especially right now. If we were to go to a nuclear war right now, I think America would win that war very quickly. Like it would be like the quickest war we ever won. Depending on how much return fire, which could amount to nothing. Like I don't think that's totally implausible that we could conduct a World War III without really taking casualties. I personally think that, because if we just completely like obliterate someone with nuke, and let's say they weren't ready for it, or their capability wasn't that great, I think it could go off a lot better. But I'm not necessarily saying that we should just do that. I'm not the president, so it's not my call. But I wouldn't necessarily think somebody should do it. But I don't. But I think if we head to a scenario where the whole world, like everyone has nukes, that's I don't know. I think that's pretty shitty. You're gonna have all these goofy countries. You have no idea. I mean, that seems like a really bad prospect. Then we approach a World War III where it's just like there's tons of nukes like everywhere, And that's what's going to happen if there's just no sense of like nuclear non-proliferation, which I think things like the Iraq War and also Ukraine are actually good for. Even though nobody wants to say this, no one would. I don't really hear anybody say anymore that the Iraq War is justified or anything, but like even everyone, pretty much everyone will tell you that the WMDs were a lie, and Bush lied, and people died, and there were no like they sent us there for a lie. They sent us there for. And you'll need to get a grip. You didn't know that there were no WMDs. They didn't know that. You weren't willing to risk it at the time. At the time after 9/11, it wasn't a risk that Bush was willing to take. So soon. He didn't necessarily lie about it, or he would have just said something else, or maybe he would have planted them if he didn't think he was really going to find them. He must have really thought he was going to find them. And either way, it wasn't a risk he was willing to take. No one else could prove otherwise. Scott Ritter couldn't prove otherwise. Scott Ritter is convicted of molesting. Mind you, Scott Ritter is like the guy who was like maybe if Scott Ritter could have got weapons inspectors into Iraq, which was his job, we could have figured it all out. But he didn't have the best character. So whoever hired Scott Ritter for the job, they might have a lot of blood on their hands. No, but I shouldn't be laughing. No, but yeah, I think this is why at the end of the day you can't George W. Bush isn't going to jail. He should go. Like nobody went to jail for no WMDs or something. This is the stupidest thing ever. America has a right to deal with countries who are hostile to us and our interests, and who we think might have all these weapons or something. That was a good call. Totally justifiable. Because do we really want a world where all these countries have all this kind of stuff? And so by doing that, he just made it a little more sure. Maybe at this point people are like, well, now there's been such a backlash against the U.S., they would never try to. Maybe it's backfired in a way, I guess you could argue, but I still think the rationale is sound. Just looking back, I think you could say that certain people had the responsibility thrown on them after a major terrorist attack. They had to come up with some response. They had to figure this stuff out. At the time, we'd never done all this stuff before. It was all like the whole thing was just figuring out stuff as we went along. When we went into Iraq, we'd never even heard of what IED was. It wasn't even a thing. And the first time I was in Iraq, we were putting sandbags on the floors of the Humvees, and we were like welding armor plates and stuff. Like it was pretty Mad Max for a while. So, but we had no idea what we were doing. It was all new. It was all new stuff. The whole country was just not too sure about the whole thing for a long time. And in the end, whatever. I don't blame Donald Rumsfeld for anything. I think actually Donald Rumsfeld was you could get in, Donald Rumsfeld is actually a really good Secretary of Defense. And it's sad that people are so dumb they couldn't tell what he was doing, and so he resigns and they replace him with Gates. And Gates was actually a terrible Secretary of Defense, and everything that he came up with was no good, which is why Obama kept him on board. You know, because you get rid of the rock star like Rumsfeld, and then you bring in Gates. You know. So I don't know. That's how we've gotten such crummy leaders. Because as a country, we've had just rotten people. But at some point, I don't know. Maybe things will turn around. But I in general, yeah, I think the climate created after 9/11, the new conceptualization of things in the war on terror atmosphere necessitated a zero tolerance approach and a removal of Saddam Hussein. Even if you think he's a cool guy, it created a new paradigm where he couldn't stick around. So beyond that, we definitely made some huge mistakes going forward. We dragged things out way too long, especially in Afghan, and we could have came up with better mission objectives and things in the way we went forward. But it's I mean, like we had no idea what we were doing, and I remember when we went into this one area and like in the Zidane, and it was the first time that I'd ever even heard the word Salafist before, and like no one knew what they were at all, and there's all I mean. And but you would ask officers and I asked officers in briefings about like who the enemy was, if it's Sunnis or Shiites, or who these Salafists are, or if they're former regime elements and things. And it's a little bit of everything. It seems like they had no idea who the insurgents were and things. Like there were huge problems, and like our intel and things like that it had huge problems. But there wasn't enough time. We just didn't know enough about what we were getting into. But we had to do something. We didn't know what we were doing. We had to do something. So it turned into a lot of figuring it out. You know. So quickly we found out. We did find out who these guys were, what their motivations were, what they really called themselves. Like by the second time I went, you know. We had up armored Humvees. We had all these stuff to block radio frequencies. We had route clearance, and we had all this stuff. But for a long time, but that was years into it. You know, it took a lot of figuring it out. So it's real easy to but we didn't. 9/11 was a huge surprise, and it was like things changed overnight. And the world was better before. It's true, it was better before. And then the 90s, you know, I was in high school with 9/11, and this is the end of the 90s. The 90s ended on 9/11. And so the world that was created was different, but we just entered into a new kind of epic at the time. Just as much as, say, in the 1930s or so, that was its own epic, where you had different, you know, things were necessitated to be a certain way. Like suddenly things were like, communist and fascist and then like the New Deal and things like that, like in America, which is like the same. It was like not the same as those things, but it was like a product of the same epic. Or so it was the product of the time. And so the things that happened after 9/11 were a product of it. It really ushered in a new, just a whole new thing. And so now I think we, you know, looking back, we have a better understanding of that. and going forward, we need to get a better grip on some of the stuff. But yeah, so that's why I would say that just looking back, I'm not like I don't know. In the past, I've criticized quite a bit myself. I'm sure. Like, I remember I like George W. Bush visited the Chow Hall, and like I neglected to. At the time, I'm like I wasn't interested, and looking back, not to say that we had the greatest people leading us or something, that would be a little bit crazy, but it's not. They weren't bad for the reasons that say are usually given. The reasons why people give. The reasons that people use to criticize the war on terror are the exact opposite reasons of the reasons that are true. They're like the stupid reasons that make things get worse. That's why not every complaint should just be accepted. There's good criticisms and bad. There's stuff that leads to better places and some that leads to worse. I think there were a lot of ideas even at the time. People say, why do all the nation building stuff? Why not just do fight terrorism just like an extermination camp, like you would exterminate, just look at them like a pest infestation or something, and just ruthlessly wherever they are, just rid the terrorists, just whatever that looks like. No nation building component to it. That these are ideas that are good. I also think that in a way, nation building could have been done better than it was. Like, I think a lot of the problem is that we were too dumb. We were too dumb to do it, and we weren't equipped going into it. Like, we weren't the country that had any business doing that, because we didn't have like a for export ideology that really fit. Even though maybe we thought we did, we didn't. We proved that we didn't. So if we have to do a war on terror again, these are the kind of lessons that we should learn, which are the opposite. The other thing, like, I don't know, but yeah, for now, I'll just leave it at that. All right. Thank you for listening.